7, Mr. Tapley here to walk you through your next lesson of Year 7 Humanities in Week 8 of Term 2. This lesson we will be looking at the dev task for economics. So our learning intention is to understand the instructions for the dev task, which is a practice case study to be completed by our next lesson. Our success criteria is to effectively manage our time, to ask any questions that you might have via email or Google Classroom, and to carefully read the instructions for your dev assessment. For those of you that don't know what a case study is, it's just a fancy word for an example. Basically, it's a scenario, it's an example. So I'll give you 3 sentences that say something like, Jono has this much of an income, he has this much savings, these are his expenses, he works on this job, and then you get 3 questions or 4 questions about that case study, about that example. So that's how we evaluate your understanding of different topics in economics. So we examine different scenarios. If you remember back to that budgeting activity that we did several weeks ago, I gave you 4 different examples about different families who had this much income, this much savings, and then you had to answer a few questions. That's basically what a case study is. And our dev task is a case study analysis, just a practice one. Our dev task is the mini CAT. It's our developmental task. It's our practice before we do the major assessment for the term, our CAT. So we're completing the dev task now, and the CAT will be in week 10. So this lesson we will be completing the economics dev, a practice case study that evaluates your understanding of the key topics examined in term 2. And those key topics that you'll need for the dev and the CAT were introduced in the last lesson. We looked at these in our info sheet, and then I told you whereabouts in the textbook to go as well. So you should have some understanding of those topics hopefully at this stage. The dev file can be accessed in Google Classroom Assignments, and I'll show you where that is, and we'll work through that file together. It is an open book assessment, which means you can use your textbook and the info sheet to complete the dev task, which I did mention again in the previous lesson. So you'll be provided with 1 lesson of class time to complete the dev. However, I understand it might take you some time to read the instructions or to watch this video. So, for those of you that do not finish it in class, the final due date for the dev will be Monday, June 8th, which is actually a public holiday. We're not at school, in week 9. So you've got the weekend to finish it off if you just need to finish that final question or you want to double check your answers. However, I do recommend that you aim to complete the dev in 1 lesson, so approximately 40 to 50 minutes, to help you prepare for the CAT, because the CAT will be completed very similarly to the dev. It's similar questions, similar structure, similar time frame. So for the dev, you have 1 practice case study, 1 example. In the CAT, which we'll be completing in week 10, you will have 3 examples, 1 per lesson. So you've got 3 lessons of humanities in week 10. In 1 lesson, you'll look at 1 case study, so this is Jono, a couple of questions. Next lesson, you'll look at another case study, so this is Billy, a couple of questions. 3rd lesson, you'll look at, I can't think of a 3rd name, Nick. A couple of questions, and then submit them all, and that's your dev. That's your CAT, sorry. And I'll explain the CAT in a bit more detail next week, but for now we're just focusing on our dev task. So good practice to complete the dev in 40 to 50 minutes so that you'll be ready for the CAT in week 10. So the dev results and the feedback will be discussed in our first lesson of week 9. Both my Year 7 classes actually miss out on 1 lesson because of the Queen's birthday holiday, so we've got 2 lessons in week 9. In that first lesson, we'll discuss the dev results and the feedback, which I'll be uploading to Compass. In the next lesson, so on our final lesson for week 9, we'll be introducing the CAT. So it follows the same structure as the dev. I've got a couple of screenshots of what the dev looks like just below. So it's a case study example, 3 to 4 questions. And you'll be completing both the dev and the CAT in Google Classroom. So it's going to be completed digitally. I don't have to read your messy handwriting. You're not going to hurt your hands writing when you come back. It's important that you complete the dev by the due date to receive feedback for the CAT. So I can't actually help you study for the CAT unless you complete the dev. So it's important you finish it by the due date. And if you don't think you're going to finish it, it's important that you tell me that, that you communicate your questions or your concerns so we can organize something to help you out and prepare for the CAT. So those are the class slides. The CAT the dev is available in Google Classrooms, but you can submit it to Compass if you prefer. So you'll see that I've got it open in Compass here, so you can just upload a file here. Or if you go to Google Classroom, this is what you'll be confronted with. That's your little dev file that I'm about to go through. That's the little instructions. Due date, Monday, June 8th. And it's just listed there in your assignment section of Google Classroom. So we'll go through this file together, and then you can get started. So, read through the information below, answer the questions in the space provided. We've already gone through that. I do want to highlight this sentence here though. Read each question carefully and consider the mark allocation when recording your answer. So it's important to look at how many marks each question is worth for two reasons. One, it tells you what you need to write for the question. So if I have a 1 mark question, I know I have to do one task, and I know that I need to not add a significant amount of detail. So 1 mark question, you'd probably be writing 1 sentence or 2 sentences. If it was a 4 mark question, you're probably writing 4 sentences or 5 sentences. And the other reason is it tells you how much time you should be spending on that question. So if you're spending 40 minutes on a single 1 mark question, that's probably not how to complete your dev properly. So it's important to read the question very carefully and then look at the mark allocation. So I'll work through these questions with you together. And again, you'll be completing this in a Google Doc, so you can type this in. This is your own individual copy, and then you just need to, mine says share, but you also say submit or hand in, and I'll be able to mark that for you. So here's our case study. Here's our example. We're looking at Akito, which is a very cool name. Akito is 62 years old, and he's very close to retirement. He has worked in the hardware store Bunnings, which sells tools, construction materials, outdoor furniture, barbecues, since he was 22 years old. So he's worked there for 40 years, very long time. It was probably a very different store when he first started working there. When he retires, Akito plans to go on a European holiday with his partner. So that's the information we've been given in our case study. So all these questions afterwards are going to relate to this information here. So question 1, outline one way, so just one way, that Akito's work may have been different when he first started working at Bunnings 40 years ago compared to now. So I've read the question. I know I need to outline just one way that his work was different 40 years ago compared to now. I know it's worth 1 mark, so I'm only going to write 1 or 2 sentences, spend a couple of minutes on it, 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes max. And if we go back to our revision slides, this is probably what I'm looking at here, the information in my summary sheet in my textbook that I've written on work, which is in chapter 20.7. If I go back to my question, think about it for Akito here. Think about his case study, his example. 40 years ago, how do you think Bunnings, the store that sells tools and hardware materials, how do you think it would have been different? Do you think they would have sold different products? Do you think there would have been less electronic products being sold? Do you think he had a different job? How did he interact with customers? So there's no wrong answer here. Well, there are, but you just need one answer. Only one way that Akito's work was different 40 years ago compared to now. So this is going to relate to your understanding of work and how technology has impacted work. Question 2. Identify one benefit Akito may receive from his job and outline how working in Bunnings may provide him with that benefit. So it's a 2 mark question, so I know that if I read this question carefully, I'm going to get 1 mark for identifying one benefit Akito has from his job. If we go back to our little revision slides, one of the topics we looked at was financial and non-financial benefits. That's probably where I'm going for this question. 1 mark for telling me a benefit, and then another mark for telling me how working at Bunnings actually provides him with that benefit. So you need to explain or outline how working at this store has provided this benefit. So if you say, oh, this benefit helps him fly an airplane, it probably doesn't, but that's one example. You would have to explain how his work would lead to that benefit, if that makes sense. So 2 mark question, you're probably spending, again, 4 or 5 minutes on it, and you're probably writing 2 or 3 sentences. Question 3. Advise Akito about why it is important to prepare a cash budget when he retires. 2 marks, again, probably 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 or 3 sentences. I'm going to get 1 mark for explaining, well, what is a budget? And then I'm probably going to get 1 mark for explaining why is it important, what is a budget good for? And that was one of our topics we looked at, budget, which is located in chapter 21.2 and 21.3. Question 4. So question 4 asks you to look at this little graph here. So this is a visual representation of the travel options Aikido has for his European holiday. So you mentioned in the case study that he's just retiring and he's going to go on a European holiday with his partner. That's the bell, lunchtime. I'll try and finish this up quickly so I can get my lunch. And these are the different options he has for his European holiday. So you can see we've got all these different travel companies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. AUD is Australian dollars, so this is how much each of those travel companies are going to charge him for his holiday, how much money he's spending. And you can see the blue bar is how much the flights cost, and the red bar is how much the accommodation costs. So for World Tours, their flights are going to cost Aikido $1,200, accommodation $800. Whereas Blue Star has very cheap flights, but their accommodation is very expensive. So question 4 asks you to look at this graph and answer a couple of questions. Identify one producer and one consumer during a European holiday. So using this data and using what we know about Aikido, one producer and one consumer for this question here. 2 marks. So again, I'm probably going to get 1 mark for a producer, 1 mark for a consumer. And again, we studied that as one of our topics in our little info sheet. 4B. This is just a 1 mark question, so I'm not going to write an essay. It's 1 or 2 sentences. Which travel company offers the most expensive accommodation in Europe? So this question, you're going to have to be able to looking at that graph and identify 1, which one is accommodation? I'm hoping you're not colorblind. And 2, which one is most expensive? Then finally 4C. Which company would you recommend Aikido use for his European holiday? Justify your answer, so you have to explain your response. So for this question, whereas in the 4B, you just had to tell me the actual travel company. 4C, it's a 2 mark question, so it's going to be a bit more detail, a bit more time spent on it. You'll get 1 mark for saying which company he should use. So you'd probably want to look at this and say, which one is the cheapest? Which one has the cheapest overall cost? And then another mark for explaining why he should use that company. So if you say, I think he should use Blue Star, that's 1 mark. And then if you explain why, so maybe their flights are cheap, their accommodation's cheap, maybe they're the cheapest overall, that's an extra mark there. So that's all you need to do, guys. There's 4 questions for the dev task. Then you just need to click submit or hand in or whatever it is. And you can submit it to Google Classroom, or again, I've got a file for you to chuck it into Compass, but I recommend using Google Classroom. If you have any questions, guys, about the dev, about how to use Google Classroom, how to submit these files, please let me know. We will be back at school soon, which is exciting. So we will go over the dev results in class, so I won't have to do it in another video, but in week 9 also I will introduce the cat and I'll explain a bit more information about that. So if you're freaking about the cat, please don't. We'll give you lots of time in class, lots of instructions, and yeah, if you have any other questions, how I can help you, please let me know. So best of luck, guys. Cheers.